Good morning, everybody, and welcome to our Fireside Chat today. I'm in the studio on my own today, and Amantha is joining us from her home office. By way of introduction, Dr. Amantha Imber is an organisational psychologist, founder of Australia's leading innovation consultancy, Inventium, and co-creator of the Australian Financial Review's Most Innovative Companies list. In 2019, Amantha was named as one of the Australian Financial Review's 100 Women of Influence. Amantha is also the host of a #1 ranking business podcast, How I Work, where she interviews some of the world's leading innovators about their habits, rituals, and strategies for structuring their day. And if you haven't got onto Amantha's podcast, I highly recommend that you do. We recently had Amantha come in and present to our board and leadership team, and I can assure you that Amantha provides you takeaways that are directly translatable into practice. They might be a little bit scary at first, withdrawals from social media. Her facilitation is delivered with a great sense of humour and delivers complex science in a way that makes sense to everybody in the room. Amantha says, we live in a world littered with digital distraction and temptation. It's time to reinvent the way we work, which is now more relevant than ever. So please join me in welcoming Amantha to our Fireside Chat today. Welcome, Amantha.
Hi, thanks. Good to be here, Anne.
Yeah, great to have you. So let's just start off with a little bit about you in terms of your journey to where you are now and what you wanted to do when you were growing up.
I wanted to do a lot of things, but psychology was always a constant. My mum's a clinical psychologist, so she would, discuss her work with me from an early age, and I always had a fascination around people and why people do the things that they do.
Yeah, awesome. And so through your journey, what have been some of the pivotal moments that have sort of affected your direction and what you're actually doing today?
Look, I think the big one for me was deciding to start Inventium, which I started about 14 years ago. So I don't consider myself, one of these entrepreneurial people that was selling lemonade when I was still in the womb. For me, Inventium, starting my own business was a plan B. So I was working as a consumer psychologist in advertising. I was just having too many ethical challenges around the idea of using my psychology skills to help people do things like buy more chocolate. And I thought very passionate about creativity and innovation and also science. I'm a science geek, and combining the two was what I wanted to do. And I couldn't find anywhere I wanted to work. So I thought, well, I'll just create my own organization that I want to work at.
Yeah, awesome. And how was that? How did you go doing that? Was that incredibly challenging for you, setting up your own business and trying to start out on your own?
To be honest, I was probably just a bit naive about it, and it was pretty easy. And I had clients from day one because all my advertising agency clients kind of had blind faith that what I would be doing would be okay.
Excellent. As a leader and a business owner, maybe even pre-corona and now we're in corona, it might not be any different for you at the moment, but what does a sort of a normal day look like for you and your team?
So for me, my days probably look quite different to my team. I a year ago, stepped down from the CEO role of running Inventium. So I no longer kind of have manager duties, if you like. I'm a full-time maker. So a typical week for me looks like a lot of keynote speaking and a lot of travel, although now that's looking more like virtual keynotes at the moment, which I think are super fun. And my podcast takes up quite a bit of time. So sourcing guests, responding to pitches for guests, and preparing for interviews, doing the interviews, and everything that goes with having a podcast. And I do quite a bit of writing for the Australian Financial Review, Business Insider, Yahoo, Fast Company, places like that. And I'm always researching and reading a lot of academic journals to try to understand what are some new strategies that we can be using to improve the way that we work.
So at the start of this sort of overview, you said that you spend your day as a maker. Maybe just explain to our audience what a maker is.
Well, quite simply, a maker is someone that makes stuff. For me, that's not physical products. For me, that is making, like turning ideas into something practical. So I make the podcast. I, make articles that are published in various places, and I do a lot of new product development at Inventium. So really understanding what are the big kind of customer problems or challenges that our clients are struggling with, and generating solutions that will solve those challenges ultimately.
Yeah, fantastic. So in this new norm of working from home, and so many people are currently working from home, how do we ensure productivity?
Yeah, well, look, I think two of the most impactful strategies I could give is, the first one is having structure to your day is really important. Right now, with the world in chaos, having a sense of control internally is a very important thing for mental health. This is why people stockpile toilet paper, because it's something small, albeit irrational, that we can do to feel more in control. Like, we are always going to have clean bums. That feels like we're in control. But in terms of our work days, it's really important that we can provide some structure and predictability to our work days as well. So one thing that is a really great thing to do is to understand what your chronotype is. Now, I find that most people have not heard of the term chronotype. It is a huge body of research through psychologists researching circadian rhythms, which in simple terms is basically, where are your peaks and troughs of energy over a 24-hour period. So broadly speaking, there are three chronotypes that people can fall into. The first are larks. These are people who wake without an alarm at 5:30 in the morning. That's about 16-17% of the population. They're deeply irritating to owls, who are at the other end of the spectrum, about 20% of the population, people that do their best thinking and work at night. And then everyone else is a middle bird. So it's a kind of normal distribution curve, if you like. And actually knowing what your chronotype is, because this determines when you have your peak brain power and non-peak brain power, you should be structuring your day accordingly. So I am a lark, for example. I do my best deep focus thinking in the morning, typically before 10 or 11 in the morning. So I will structure my day so I don't have meetings before sort of typically about 11 o'clock. Then I know for myself, and most people will have a dip after lunch. This is a great time to be doing shallow work. So for example, work in progress meetings, your daily stand-ups. Why any teams are choosing to do those at 9 o'clock in the morning is absolute madness, because for a lot of people, that's their best thinking time. And then larks and middlebirds have a rebound towards the end of the day. Owls flip that, they operate in reverse. And, if you'd like to assess your chronotype, we've got a tool at Inventium that we've sourced that's scientifically validated. So just look me up on LinkedIn, Amantha Imber, and I can easily get that to anyone that wants to assess their chronotype.
Yeah, awesome. So what happens when you're working with a group of people that are a mix, and you want to do some maybe deep work with other people that are owls and larks? How do you manage that?
It's a really good question. We come across this all the time, and particularly when people are working in different time zones. We work with a lot of companies globally who, particularly if you've got teams like in the US, for example, the morning is peak teleconference or video conference time, but that's good deep work time as well. I think the reality is that you shouldn't be spending as much time as you are in meetings, probably. I think a really good rule of thumb to apply to meetings, which I don't think gets applied very often, is applying Parkinson's law to meetings. So for those that don't know Parkinson's law, this basically says that a task that you are doing will expand or contract to the time that you give it. So rather than defaulting to 30 or 60-minute meetings, a much better question to ask when you're setting meetings is, how much time does this issue deserve? So rather than defaulting to 30 or 60 minutes, which is highly inefficient because Parkinson's law says that, well, it will take you the 30 or 60 minutes to do whatever you're doing. Instead, go, how much time does this issue that we're talking about deserve, and allocate time accordingly. Maybe it only deserves 10 minutes. And if we can start to think about our meetings like that, then we kind of start to eradicate the problem of, well, how do we coordinate things? Because we have to have all of these meetings and all these conversations. Well, I personally don't think that you do. I think that probably you are wasting a lot of time in meetings right now.
I think there's probably a huge part of our audience today that would 100% agree with you. So, yeah. One of the things that we've sort of talked a little bit about over the last few weeks with some of our business leaders is around innovation. And in the age of COVID, of the COVID bubble, sort of innovation is probably more important than ever because companies need to pivot. So how do we ensure that companies continue to do that in this current environment?
I think that the first thing that organisations need to be doing, and certainly something that we work with a lot of our clients on at the moment, is re-understanding what are the problems that you are trying to solve for your customers. Because customers and clients, consumers, however we term them, their problem set, their pain points are now completely different to what they were pre-COVID. And the first thing that companies need to be doing is really getting in there, talking to customers, observing them, putting themselves in the shoes of their customers and understanding what is the new set of problems that we can solve for our customers. And if you can understand that, that is the critical first step to innovating in this COVID environment.
Okay, really good feedback, actually. It's all about the customer. Everything comes back to the customer, huh?
Yeah.
So always start with the customer. Yeah. And what skills are needed to ensure that we're actually structuring our days? Because it's very easy to get lost in the days when you're working from home and with the sort of without the daily structure.
Yeah, I think this is an interesting one because most companies, what I observed when people transition the majority of their workforces to working from home is that all they thought about were the technology issues. Will technology work? That's obviously important. You need an internet connection. You need a way of, doing video chats and all those sorts of things. But very few companies actually stopped and thought, hang on, what are the skills that we need to actually train people in so that they work productively at home and that we also maintain their psychological well-being? Where we were inundated with our clients is going, how do we help build those skills? Because they are not natural skills. The average person is not aware of what the psychological research is actually saying about how do we work most productively from home. So that's the kind of stuff that we are helping our clients with. So an example there, for example, is one of the best things that you can do, and this is, I think, really helpful advice for those that are balancing homeschooling with also working, is think about your day as a series of sprints. So rather than going, I've got this big 8-hour, 10-hour day to work, see your day as a series of 60 to 90-minute sprints. So the natural rhythm that our brain works in is 60 to 90 minutes, typically closer to 90 minutes. And if you can block out your day in those kinds of chunks, particularly outside of meetings, obviously meetings normally default to that, unfortunately, but when you're thinking about what's this sort of like deep focused work that you need to be doing, work that requires strategic or analytical thinking, those big projects that you're trying to tackle and make progress on, actually block them out in your diary as desk work in periods of 60 to 90 minutes and work in sprints. And if your partner, if you're co-parenting at home, is also working in the same way, it then becomes a little bit easier to tag team rather than just going, oh, well, can you cover for me while I do this meeting and that meeting? That's very reactive. Actually plan it proactively in terms of sprints so that you're either on or you're a primary or secondary school teacher, as the case may be.
Yeah, all right. One of the things that you do very well is your podcast, How I Work. And it's actually one of the most popular business podcasts around at the moment. So congratulations to you. And you've interviewed some of the world's most celebrated thinkers and business leaders. Who really stood out for you, and what were some of your key learnings from some of the people that you've spoken to?
Yeah, sure. So I just love doing the podcast. Like it's selfishly, it's like none of these people would give me an hour of their time normally, but they do because I've got a podcast that gets a lot of downloads. So that is good. I think probably, my absolute favorite interview was the very first one I did for my podcast, which was with Adam Grant. So so people on the line, I don't know if there are any Adam Grant fans there, maybe put that in the chat box if you're an Adam Grant fan. He wrote books like Give and Take and Originals, and I think he's like Wharton's highest ranked professor in terms of teaching effectiveness. So I interviewed him. He's an organizational psychologist like myself, and a lot of the tips from that very first interview stuck with me, but two that I'll mention. Firstly, something that we can struggle with, particularly working from home, is just getting the motivation to start your day, because procrastination is rife when you're working from home. A tip that Adam gave me is around finishing your day parking on a downhill slope. What that means is rather than finishing a task, which is our natural inclination, because as humans we're programmed to enjoy and prefer and have a bias towards closure, actually stop your task halfway through. So for example, if you're writing a report, stop mid-sentence, which feels really unnatural. But what will happen when you resume that task in the morning, because you've parked on that downhill slope, it will feel really easy to actually just get back into it, and improves the chances of us getting into flow quickly and avoiding procrastination. So I love that. Another thing, he introduced me to some research from Ohio State University that showed the impact of batching meetings. So if we can batch our meetings together, which is easier said than done, we actually improve productivity. So what happens if we've got a meeting coming up in the diary in the next hour or two? Research has shown that our productivity drops by about 22%. And you've probably all experienced this. I experienced this myself. When I've got a meeting coming up, I'm reluctant to get stuck into something. I'm kind of like messing around with like shallow work, like emails or messenger and stuff like that, because I don't want to get into flow because I'll be interrupted by this meeting. So where we can batch meetings together, very effective productivity strategy. I could go on about many, many tips, but there are a couple that stood out.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you. I think actually just sort of on that, one of the hardest things I think for people is when you're actually, I found this happened to me yesterday. I was in the middle of deep work, not really knowing I was actually in deep work, and then got interrupted. And then you completely lose your train of thought, your track, and then very hard to actually go back to it and get back into the zone that you're actually in. Yeah, so
very much.
One of the things, procrastination, you touched on that before from working from home, very easy to procrastinate, and for that matter in the office as well. So I guess that's very much around structure and how people structure their day so that they avoid procrastination.
Well, look, this is where digital distractions are a big source of procrastination. And what most people think is that they need to just apply willpower to staying off digital distractions, like refreshing news sites or social media or, their phone. The way I recommend that you think about this is willpower is a limited resource. So we've only got so much willpower, and with every decision or choice that we make, we kind of chip it away at our willpower muscle. So a far better thing to do is to apply strategies that remove the need for willpower when trying to remove digital distractions from your life. So for example, there's software called Freedom. There's also similar software called Serene. And what both these pieces of software do, there are free versions, is that you can actually set them to block you from being able to access certain websites and certain software, like your email software, for example, during certain periods of time. So it basically locks you out. So it eliminates the need to use willpower to stay away from these digital distractions. So that's certainly very effective. But I think with procrastination, often what it can come down to is just general motivation. I think a very useful theory for people to keep in mind, particularly I imagine there are probably leaders on this call, maybe struggling to motivate themselves or their team. We did an Ask Me Anything webinar a week ago with a bunch of our clients. We had about 700 people register, and there were a lot of questions around how do I motivate myself and my team during this really hard time. So there are 3 ingredients that you need to be thinking about. This comes from self-determination theory. So firstly, a key driver of motivation is autonomy. So if you are a micromanager, or if you have a micromanager as a manager, that is a recipe for killing motivation. People need to feel autonomy and freedom to do their work as they see fit and experience that. Secondly is mastery. So people need to feel challenged by what they do, and there needs to be the opportunity to learn and improve your skills. So that's about mastery. Again, if people are doing jobs where they feel like they could do it with their eyes shut, again, that's a recipe for low motivation. The third is connection. So thinking about how do you actually really have the opportunity for deep connection during this time, particularly with co-workers. And certainly I can share a few thoughts there if we want to go into that. But think about those 3 key ingredients: autonomy, mastery, and connection. If any one of those are missing, it's probably a good place to kind of go, okay, how can I bolster that in myself or in my team?
Okay, awesome. We've got quite a few questions, Amanda, so I might just throw to some questions from the audience.
Perfect.
All right. How are the best companies keeping connected with customers and understanding their new pain points? Are there examples of businesses who are actually doing this well?
Yeah, sure. So look, it's something that I find like it is a big differentiator, I think, between companies that survive a crisis like this and, you know, a recession versus those that don't. And that's been proven again, you know, time and time again in the research. If you're deliberately focusing on innovation as opposed to cutting innovation budgets, which is a lot of companies' natural inclination right now, you're going to come out on top. So certainly we run a lot of training programs around how do you identify customer needs. There's certainly there, you know, it is about getting as close to customers as possible. You know, we teach customers, our clients, various strategies to do that. But look, in short, to put it really simplistically, you need to be speaking to customers, you need to be observing them, and you need to be putting yourself in their shoes. And through those three kind of different mechanisms and asking the right kind of exploratory and probing questions as opposed to confirmatory questions is certainly a good place to start. I mean, we spent a day training people on this, but they're just some pithy things, I guess, to answer that question.
Awesome. Somebody's asked how you would position the C19 app, and from particularly probably from a business perspective. Any thoughts?
Yeah, look, you know, for me, it's an interesting one to answer. I have downloaded it myself. For me, I mean, people are motivated by gain. Like, no one's going to do this for look, I'd like to think that people would do it for the greater good, but we know that, you know, a lot of people are, you know, generally going to act in their own best interest. So I think if you can position it in that way, like how it actually supports their best interests in terms of avoiding COVID, which is the ultimate goal, then I think, you know, that's probably going to be tapping into a lot of people's motivation.
Yeah. All right. Awesome. And what are some of your own sort of personal daily habits that help you to be the best that you are?
Sure. So a couple of things that I do to finish the day. I think like a lot of people have morning rituals. I've got one too. I can go into that, but I think morning rituals are very overdone. But I think shutting down rituals, how do you shut down your workday, is something that not many people talk about. So I can talk about that, which I've actually recently run an experiment about. So a project that I'm running this year, I guess is one of my maker projects, is called My Year of Better, you know, which you can check out, myyearofbetter.com. We're basically running experiments and just kind of open sourcing it. So got like 1,700 other people that are also participating in these experiments. And so we've got a lot of data. So how I shut down my work days, I ask two questions. So firstly, I ask myself, what are the projects that I made significant progress on? This is important. You know, research from Harvard professor Teresa Amabile suggests that feeling a sense of progress towards meaningful projects that we're working on is the number one predictor of motivation and engagement at work. Yet many people don't stop and reflect as to where they've actually made progress. So that's the first question. The second question I ask myself is, what's the most important thing that I can be tackling tomorrow? Which is basically about me getting focused, getting excited about the day ahead, and avoiding that procrastination that can often happen in the morning where you're like, oh, okay, work's starting. What should I be working on? But instead for me, it's like, okay, this is what I should be working on. And when we measured productivity uplift from people adopting that habit, that led to about a 41% uplift in productivity just through asking those two questions as a end of day ritual.
Right. Fantastic. A question. How do you deal with the imposter syndrome, feeling inadequate? Lots of senior women I talk to seem to have this.
Yeah.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, look, absolutely. I've had it throughout my life, and I've written about it and spoken about it quite a lot. You know, for me, a quote from Seth Godin resonated very strongly with me. He said that confidence is a choice. You know, rather than kind of feeling like I'm this victim of imposter syndrome, like, you know, every other female leader, it's like, well, confidence is a choice. So I can choose to be confident and, you know, believe in my abilities and that I deserve to, you know, like where I've got to. But I think it's also really important to practice humility. And I think working in the innovation space, it's like you can't be a good innovator if you're not humble, because humility suggests that you've always got more that you could be learning. And look, ultimately the way I think about it, you know, if, you know, particularly like with speaking engagements and, you know, we're in client engagements, is all I want to do. I just want to try and be useful. I'm very focused on practical strategies, even though I, could go to town with all academic theories and stuff. For me, it's like, if I can just give people even just one practical nugget that they can take away that will, significantly improve the way that they approach their work, then I feel good about what I've done, and I don't need to worry about being an imposter.
I think that's fantastic. And last night, as I was scrolling through everything that was about Amantha Imber, I noticed that you're incredibly generous with what you share from your research and everything to the community. So thank you for that, because there's some incredible insights in there that everybody on this call today would absolutely benefit from. And we can maybe have a chat a little bit later about how they go about accessing those. One or two final questions, Amantha. Will we have a readjustment period to being back in the office after working from home for so long?
We absolutely will. I was speaking to a client about this a few days ago, because they're trying to figure out what is their strategy for readjustment. I think firstly, it has to be gradual. There needs to be an easing back in, and there needs to be flexibility. Like, I suspect what has happened is that now that people are kind of in the groove of working from home, there are a lot of benefits to working from home. Like, firstly, most people are winning like 90 to 120 minutes back in their day through no commute. Plus, they're able to see their family for so many more hours than usual. My 6-year-old daughter's with me in the house today. I'm fortunate in that I've got a nanny helping me with homeschooling. But how delightful is it that we can have recess and lunch together? Like, that's super cool. And like, who wants to give that up? So I think that companies need to be, very cognizant of not forcing anyone to do anything, and also not expecting change to be sudden. It needs to be gradual. People need to ease back into it.
Yeah. And do you think, sort of following on from that, do you think that organisations will be unpacking what worked well for remote work too, and be open to more flexible work hours? So companies that were potentially not on board from a flexible working environment, do you think they'll be far more open to it?
Look, I would suspect so. I think that it's, a lot of leaders that were hesitant and maybe had some trust issues have been forced into this change, whether they like it or not. It's kind of like been a bit of a baptism of fire, which I don't think is a bad thing. So I would hope that, they've had some positive experiences, but, certainly, I do quite a bit of work with leadership teams, and these are the issues that they're grappling with. And, I guess where I try to help is going, well, here's what the research says. Here's what the data supports. So maybe, there's some merit in following that.
Absolutely. A question, I've heard you use pen and paper over digital notes. Is this still working for you, and how do you apply it?
So look, for any creative work that I'm doing, like, for example, which might be strategy work, it might be new product development work, it might be sort of sketching out some ideas for the columns that I write, my preference is pen and paper. There's a freedom there, and there's a lack of digital distraction. Like, you can't kind of, command tab to an internet browser and get distracted. So I absolutely use pen and paper. I also, in meetings, I will take notes on pen and paper. We comprehend, our comprehension and our memory is much better when we take notes on using pen and paper than on the computer, where we're more tempted to just write down things verbatim and not actually process things properly.
Yeah, I'm a big pen paper girl. Final question, Amantha. What's something that you won't take for granted again once we come out the other side of COVID-19?
What won't I take for granted again? Gosh, I think like so many things, but I certainly won't take face-to-face connections with people for granted for quite some time.
Yeah, totally get it. Any final comments from you today, Amantha, before we sign off?
Look, if people have more questions, I can see that there's a lot happening in chat. Feel free to get in touch directly. Anne's got my details. Otherwise, I'm easy to find online. Amantha Imber on LinkedIn. I think I'm the only one. Or at Amantha on Twitter. So super easy to find.
Yeah. Thanks so much for joining us today, Amantha, and sharing your really valuable insights with our community. Really appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.